In the spring of 1944, the German army held a wall of concrete that ran from the top of Norway to the border of Spain. Hitler called it the Atlantic Wall, and it was built to last 1,000 years. Then the Allies landed, the bombers came after, and much of that concrete was sealed, buried, or drowned. We found 10 places along the wall you were never meant to enter. Stay for number 1, a hill near Calais called Mimoyecques, drilled hollow for superguns meant to level London, sealed by British bombs and never reopened. The men who poured that concrete were told it would outlast the century. They were not wrong. It has outlasted them, their war, and the countries they built it against. We begin on a quiet Belgian beach. Number 10. Raversyde, Belgium. Just outside Ostend, in a stretch of low dunes above the North Sea, the marram grass grows over 60 concrete bunkers. Walk in from the tram stop and you find gun pits, observation posts, and 2 miles of trench, most of it exactly where the German army left it. Some of this ground is older than the Second War. The Aachen Batterie here was dug by German troops in 1915 to guard the occupied port of Ostend, and it is one of the only First World War coastal batteries left on the whole coast. The rest went up between 1942 and 1944, when this became a link in the Atlantic Wall, a firing position covering the harbour approaches. 60 bunkers, and an Enigma cipher machine still sitting in one of them. By rights, this stretch should be gone. After the war, most of the wall was dynamited for hard core or stripped for scrap, and the concrete that survived did so by accident. But this ground belonged to Prince Charles, Count of Flanders, brother of the King and Regent of Belgium, who settled here and decided the bunkers would not be touched. He kept them as a monument. Because of that one choice, Raversyde is now one of the best preserved sections of the entire wall, open to anyone who wants to walk it. It survives because a prince refused to let the past be tidied away. Most of the wall was not so lucky. Move west along the coast, to the mouth of a great river, and you find a fortress that the sea and the port between them almost erased. Number 9. Hoek van Holland, Netherlands. At the mouth of the Mimoyecques, where the water runs inland to the port of Rotterdam, the dunes are full of buried concrete. The German army took this coast in 1940 and understood at once what it was worth. Whoever held Hoek van Holland held the sea gate to Rotterdam and to the industry behind it. So they turned the town into a fortress. A ring of over 1,000 bunkers, a double anti-tank ditch, cut around the whole place, and in January 1944, the formal title of Festung, one of only a handful of coastal strongpoints given that name. The hardest part sat on the island of De Beer, which is south of the water. 52 bunkers packed onto a single square mile. It was so heavily defended that the Allies decided it was not worth the blood and simply went around it. So while the rest of the Netherlands was freed, Hoek van Holland waited. It did not surrender until the 10th of May 1945, after the war in Europe was already over. What finally beat the fortress was not an army, it was Rotterdam. In the 1960s, the port threw out a vast new harbour called Europoort, and the southern half of the Festung, the whole De Beer core, vanished under docks and terminals. Today, the northern bunkers remain in the dunes, one of them a museum, and part of that tank ditch still holds black water. The strongest fortress on the coast held out against an army and lost to a container port. Number 8. Longues-sur-Mer, France. On a 60-metre cliff between Omaha and Gold, 4 grey casemates sit in a field, and inside them are the guns. They were built late by the organisation Todt between the autumn of 1943 and the spring of 1944. 4 naval guns of 15-centimetre calibre, made in the occupied Skoda works, each in a concrete box with walls 2 metres thick. A garrison of 184 men sat here to cover the Bay of the Seine, right on the seam between 2 of the invasion beaches. On the 6th of June 1944, they opened fire on the fleet. The Allied warships answered. The cruiser Ajax and 2 French cruisers found the range and began knocking the casemates apart, and by the following morning the guns had fallen silent, and the survivors, many of them over 40, had given up. Here is what makes Longues different from almost every other battery on this list. The guns were never taken away. Everywhere else along the wall, the barrels went for scrap in the years after the war, cut up and carted off. At Longues, for whatever reason, nobody bothered. So the 4 guns are still sitting in their casemates, pitted and rusting, pointing out to sea, the only original coastal guns left in the whole of Normandy. You can park in the field and walk straight in, stand behind the breach and look out through the embrasure at the same grey water the gunners watched on the morning of the landings. Most of the wall was sealed to keep you out. This one was simply left open and forgotten in plain sight. Number 7. Batterie Dietl, Engeløya, Norway. Far up the Norwegian coast, well inside the Arctic Circle, 3 vast concrete rings sit on a headland at the end of a remote island. The German war effort ran on iron ore, and the ore came south by sea from the port of Narvik. To guard that route down the Vestfjord, the organisation Todt built one of the heaviest gun batteries on Earth here from 1942, 3 guns of 40.6 centimetre calibre. The so-called Adolf guns, each barrel around 20 metres long, each weapon weighing over 150 tons, designed for battleships that were never built and put to work on land instead. Building it, in that ground, in that cold, cost lives on a terrible scale. Around 1,700 Soviet prisoners of war and other forced labourers were worked on the site, and more than 500 of them died, most in the first winter. The people of nearby Bo were turned out of their homes with 3 days' notice, and after all of it, the guns never fired a shot in anger. Only test rounds were ever sent out over the fjord. The largest land guns in the world stood loaded and silent for the rest of the war, so they ended it exactly as they began, pointed at an enemy that never came. In 1956, they were sold for scrap. One of the barrels, so the story goes, slipped from its handlers on the way out and went to the bottom of the sea. What is left is the concrete. A remote museum in 1-gun bunker, soldiers' names still penciled on the walls, and 3 empty rings in the Arctic grass where the biggest guns ever mounted on European soil once sat and never once did their job. Number 6. IJmuiden, Netherlands. At the mouth of the North Sea Canal, the sea route into Amsterdam, there is a concrete shed so large it is hard to photograph. To build it, the Germans destroyed a town. Over 3,000 houses in IJmuiden were pulled down, along with schools and churches, and the people were evacuated, all to clear a field of fire for a fortress they called Festung IJmuiden. The reason was the boats. This was a base for the Schnellboote, the fast torpedo boats the Allies called E-boats, which hid here by day and slipped out at night to hunt shipping in the Channel and the North Sea. To shelter them, the Navy built 2 vast boat pens. The second was a monster, more than 240 metres long, its roof 5 metres of solid concrete, one of the largest bunkers anywhere in Europe. If you are finding these as unsettling as I am, do subscribe, because there is a version of this story for almost every coast in Europe, and we are working our way through them. After the landings, those pens became priority targets. British bombers dropped 53 of the 5-ton Tall Boy earthquake bombs on the harbour across a handful of raids. The smaller pen was wrecked and later blown up, but the great pen simply took it. The bombs cracked the upper roof and stopped, and the lower 5 meters never gave way. So it is still there. The largest boat pen the Germans ever built in the Netherlands now belongs to a concrete firm, and in the torpedo store beside it, local bands rehearse. Keep that bomb in mind for number 1, because the same weapon that failed to finish IJmuiden is the one that finally sealed the supergun. First, the largest fortress in all of Northern Europe, on a Danish headland that is now sliding slab by slab into the sea. Number 5. Hanstholm, Denmark. On the wind-blown dunes of northwest Jutland, at the edge of the North Sea, sits a gun pit 30 meters across with a 2-meter plinth at its center. This was the heart of the largest coastal fortress in Northern Europe. Built from 1941, Festung Hanstholm covered around 9 square kilometers and held more than 3,000 men. Its job was to close a door. Together with a sister battery at Kristiansand in southern Norway, and a belt of sea mines between them, Hanstholm was meant to seal the Skagerrak, the 120-kilometer strait that is the way into the Baltic. The tools were 4 naval guns of 38-centimeter caliber, the same pattern fitted to the battleship Bismarck. Each weighed 110 tons, each needed a crew of 90, and each could throw a shell 55 kilometers, almost halfway to Norway. To make room for them, the town of Hanstholm was cleared of its people. When the war ended, the Danes faced a problem. The bunkers were too solid to knock down and too dangerous to blow up. So for the most part, they simply left them where they stood. And that is where the story turns slow and strange. The North Sea has been eating this coast for 80 years, so the fortress that was too strong to demolish is now being taken apart by the water instead. Some of the bunkers have slid down onto the beach. A few sit out in the surf, tilting, as the land they were anchored to washes away. The main bunker is now a museum, 2,500 square meters of it, with an ammunition train that still runs the old track. The guns are gone. The pit remains. A fortress built to hold back a navy, slowly losing to the tide. Number 4. Batterie, Lothringen, Jersey. On the granite headland of Noirmont, at the western end of St. Aubin's Bay, a squat command bunker looks out over the sea towards St. Helier. Jersey holds a strange distinction. The Channel Islands were the only British soil that Nazi Germany ever occupied, and Hitler was so determined to keep them that he fortified them out of all proportion to their size. Batterie Lothringen went up from 1941, built by the organisation Todt and named after a German warship. It was the only naval coastal battery on the island, 4 guns of 15-centimeter caliber, their barrels made by Krupp back in 1917, set on open platforms above the cliffs. Their purpose was not to fire on France. It was to stop the British taking back their own island. When the islands were freed in May 1945, the British were in no mood to leave the guns standing. They dragged the barrels to the cliffs at Les Landes and threw them over the edge onto the rocks below. The bunkers were sealed and filled with rubble, and there they stayed, shut, for the better part of 50 years. Then the volunteers arrived. In the 1990s, the Channel Islands Occupation Society recovered one of the original barrels from the foot of the cliff and had it flown back to Noirmont underneath a Chinook helicopter. They dug out the sealed bunkers by hand. The headland itself had been bought by the island as a memorial to the Jersey people who died in the war, and the battery is opened on set days to anyone who wants to see it. The guns. Hitler aimed at Britain, thrown off a British cliff, and carried home again under a British helicopter. Number 3, the Crozon batteries, Brittany. The Crozon Peninsula reaches out into the Atlantic in a cross of high cliffs, and it guards the approach to Brest, which in the war was one of the great German submarine bases in France. Because of that harbour, the Germans fortified these headlands heavily as part of the wall. Gun batteries at Crozon, and out on the Pointe des Espagnols, buried command posts, casemates dug into the cliff tops above the Narrows. The Crozon battery was sunk into the ground so completely that today you would walk over it without knowing, save for the observation slit in its roof. When the Allies fought their way into Brest, in the late summer of 1944, the German garrison made its final stand out here on Crozon and did not give up until the middle of September. That is where most battery stories end. This one does not. Remember the promise in the opening that the wall was poured to last 1,000 years. On Crozon, in a way its builders never intended, that promise has held. This coast never stopped being military ground. In 1965, President de Gaulle chose the Île Longue, joined to the very same peninsula, as the home base for France's nuclear missile submarines. It is now one of the most secret and most heavily guarded places in the entire country, sealed behind fences and patrols. So the cliff-top ruins sit out on the coast path, some of them buried, some fenced off as the cliffs crumble into the sea. And a short way inland, behind the wire, France keeps its nuclear deterrent. 80 years on, this is still forbidden coast. Only the flag has changed. Number 2, Batterie Todt and Batterie Lindemann, France. On the cliff road near Cap Gris-Nez, at the narrowest point of the channel, stands a casemate the size of a cathedral. On a clear day from here, you can see England. This place is known as Batterie Todt. 4 Krupp guns of 38cm caliber, the same type carried by the battleship Bismarck, built from 1940 for the invasion of Britain that was never launched. It was named after Fritz Todt, the engineer who ran the whole fortification program after he died in a plane crash in early 1942. The guns were meant to control the strait, to shell Dover and the shipping lanes, and to cover an army crossing the water. Each firing chamber is 29 meters across. But Todt was not even the largest battery on this coast. A few miles west at Sangatte stood Batterie Lindemann, 3 guns of 40.6cm caliber, the heaviest on the entire Atlantic wall, which fired more than 2,200 shells across the water at Dover. The Canadians took these positions in September 1944, and then the 2 batteries went very different ways. Todt survived. One of its 4 casemates is a museum today, with a railway gun parked outside. The other 3 sit derelict in the undergrowth, one of them sealed shut as a roost for bats. Lindemann is a harder place to find, because Lindemann is gone. When the Channel Tunnel was dug in the 1980s, the spoil, all the crushed chalk and rock, was dumped at Sangatte, straight on top of the battery. The 3 great casemates that once shelled England now lie drowned beneath a man-made lake. The guns here were aimed at Dover. But 10 miles up this same coast, the Germans had started digging something meant to reach much further, all the way to London. Number 1. Mimoyecques, France. Near the village of Landres-Thun-le-Nord, a short drive inland from the cliffs of Cap Gris-Nez, there is a wooded chalk hill. From the road it looks like nothing. A field, some trees, a single tunnel mouth, a scatter of half-buried concrete. Under that hill, the Germans dug the most ambitious weapon of the entire Atlantic Wall. From September 1943, thousands of workers drove a network of sloping tunnels called drifts deep into the chalk. They were building a home for the V3, the weapon its engineers called the high-pressure pump. It was a super gun. Not a rocket, not a shell fired from an ordinary barrel, but a fixed cannon over 130 meters long, laid up the slope of the hill, with dozens of side chambers along the barrel that would fire in sequence to accelerate the shell as it climbed. And it was aimed at one target, London, 165 kilometers away. The plan was staggering. At full strength, a battery of these guns was meant to drop hundreds of shells an hour onto the capital, around the clock. 50 guns were planned at first, then cut to 25, and then to 5. Even 5 would have been something London had never faced. The tunnels were dug by forced labour, including Soviet prisoners of war, and men died in the digging. The British did not know exactly what was under the hill. They knew only that it was big, that it faced London, and that it had to go. On the 6th of July 1944, the Dam Busters came. 16 Lancasters of the Royal Air Force, 617 Squadron, each carrying a tall boy, the 12,000-pound earthquake bomb, designed to punch deep into the ground before it burst. The bombs went down through the chalk and exploded far below the surface. One of the drifts collapsed. The workers inside it were buried where they stood. That raid finished Mimoyecques. The gun never fired. When the British took the site, they judged it might one day be turned on London again. So in 1945, they packed it with explosives, brought the tunnels down, and sealed it. It stayed sealed for the better part of 40 years. There is a footnote worth keeping. The Allies never knew the tall boys had already done the job, so they kept trying. In one attempt, an American bomber packed with explosives was to be flown near the coast and steered into the site by radio. It blew up over England, killing the pilot, a young naval airman named Joseph Kennedy, elder brother of a future president. Today, a short length of tunnel has been reopened as a memorial, with a replica section of the gun and a few quiet plaques to the men who died here. But that is all you see. The deep galleries, the collapsed drift, the great concrete roof that was meant to shield the guns remain shut, flooded, and judged too dangerous to enter. Bats hang in the dark beyond the last of the lights. The supergun built to erase London was sealed by British bombs in the summer of 1944. 80 years on, most of it has never been opened. 10 places along a wall that was meant to last 1,000 years. Some of them held to that promise in ways their builders would have wanted. The great casemate at Cap Gris-Nez still stands. The guns at Longues still point out to sea. Others kept the promise in ways nobody intended. A battery drowned under the spoil of the Channel Tunnel. A fortress sliding into the North Sea. A super gun sealed in the dark under a French hill, waiting for an opening that has not come. That is the strange legacy of the Atlantic Wall. It was the largest building project of its century, poured to stop an invasion that swept past it in a single summer. And because the concrete was too vast and too solid to clear away, it is still here, nearly all of it, sealed and buried along 4,000 kilometers of coast. The war it was built for lasted 6 years. The wall has outlasted it by 80, and it is in no hurry to leave. There are more of these than we can count. From the Arctic to the Pyrenees, subscribe and we will keep walking the line together, one stretch of coast at a time. Thank you.